The Paid to Play podcast. You are listening to Paid to Play. My name is Rob Farker, your host for this exploration of the dangerous idea that bringing your whole self, even the bits that people might think are crazy or odd or weird, into your income-generating life is the best thing you can do. It might not be easy, but it is easier than we think or even fear, and I would like to show you how. Every fortnight, I chat with someone who has either successfully made their income life all about their play, or they're on their way there, and it is my pleasure today to have Frank Macri on the podcast, because Frank Macri is one of those people kind of like me. His working life is all about getting people out of jobs that they don't like or that aren't really about them at all and into paths toward fulfilling careers. He is the author of a book called Life Orgasm, a provocative guide to living with passion. Frank has had one heck of a busy life so far. He lived in China for a year and backpacked throughout Southeast Asia. He enjoys documenting his adventures on his YouTube series called Fridays with Frank, where every week he uploads a video answering questions sent in by his viewers. At the moment, he reaches over 3,000 followers in countries all over the world, and I am glad to admit that I am a recent subscriber to his channel. Frank Macri, thank you very much for coming on the Paid to Play podcast.
Thank you for having me, Rob. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, when did you first realize that helping others achieve their dreams was your thing?
Yeah, well, I started thinking about just the nature of work since I was a teenager. My first job I had when I was 16, and I cleaned up garbage at a public pool at a park in my hometown in New York. It wasn't a glamorous job at all, but it got me thinking about just how we work and why we work and who we are at our jobs. So as I continued on into college, I kept researching just the psychology of work. And by the time I graduated, I kind of noticed that, especially in my generation, there is just an overload of highly educated people with an enormous amount of skill and potential and energy, but they're lacking the clarity and the guidance to make decisions that will get them in careers that really are aligned with their passions. So I took a coaching certification, and I specialize now in supporting people who are in my generation, who are kind of ready to get out of jobs that are really shitty and not aligned with who they are. And as you said, align themselves with a fulfilling career path, because I believe it's possible. And I know that there are so many people out there who really resonate with that, and I absolutely love working with them.
Out of sheer curiosity, what was your field of study when you went to college?
I studied psychology and also public relations. So, psychology is just, I love it so much. I'm so interested in just how the mind works and how, how we have our brains, that are processing information, but our minds are really interpreting that information and creating our own realities. So I love psychology, and it really does help my own coaching, because we take a very psychological approach into figuring out, what people really want and why they want whatever it is that they want. So it's a ton of fun. And, mental health in general gets a really bad rap these days. People who go to therapists are there's this stigma that they're broken or they're ill or they're sick. And I just think that's totally bullcrap. Like, people are meant to have fears. They're meant to have desires. We all have those. It's a universal thing. It's what makes us human. So I like to, in my videos and in my book and in my coaching, I like to approach mental health in a fun and creative way, so that it's not so scary for people to kind of go deep into their psyche and really move past their blocks so that they're able to achieve what they really want.
Did you get straight into coaching once you'd got out of university? Was there another component of your working life that you did in the meantime while you were getting started out?
Well, it's a funny story because I knew right when I graduated that I wanted to immediately be a coach.
Mm.
But I, at the same time, wanted an adventure. So I was faced with a couple of very different job opportunities when I graduated. And one of those opportunities was to go the corporate route, work at a 9 to 5 job doing recruiting. And I felt really comfortable with this offer because it had a good salary and there was a lot of opportunity for growth and it had a lot of the comforts and security that most corporate jobs would offer you. But
Mm.
something inside me didn't really feel right. It didn't feel like that was what I was meant to do. And the other opportunity that I had was to go teach English in China for a year. And it was a position I had never even considered before. I didn't know that teaching abroad was a thing. It was just an email that one of my professors had sent over to me. So I applied on a whim. I got accepted, and the moment I got accepted, I'll never forget it. It was like my heart was just like screaming that yes, this is exactly what you're meant to do. And I ended up rejecting the corporate job. It was my first job offer. The economy was not good, and many people would think I was crazy for saying no to a job because you were lucky to get a job right out of graduating. So I packed my bags and I shipped across to China.
Fantastic. Yeah,
Yep.
it is sad nowadays that there is this feeling that you need to take what you can get and be and consider yourself lucky that you've got something. This sad story that most of us tell ourselves and each other all the time, rather than uh, take a risk when the risk really it's what you were sort of saying a little bit earlier on about creating your own reality. It's we almost create this picture of the world where if we dare take a risk, then and it doesn't the odds of it working out are slim and the consequences of it not working out are catastrophic.
Yeah, and a lot of times exactly what you said is those risks, people, they think about those risks and they just amplify how big those risks really are to the point where they don't make any decisions or they just stay put where they are.
Mm.
They stay in the comfort zone. And I think that really embracing those risks and putting yourself in a place where you are attracted to taking risks, not any risk, I'm not saying to go like, jump off of a cliff into
Mm.
like water and hope that you survive, but intelligent risks that kind of keep in mind what you're passionate about, what you're driven to do, and come from a deep place rather than fulfilling an instant gratification. And I like to kind of differentiate happiness and fulfillment because nowadays it's so easy for us to just go for the instant gratification. We want to watch a show, we can just pop it on Netflix.
Mm.
We want to look up a statistic and we can just search it on Google. We want to listen to a song, we can just put it up on iTunes, and it's so easy to feel good nowadays. But that is what gets us happy, and happiness is fleeting. It's there and then it's gone. So I remind people that fulfillment is different from happiness. Fulfillment is much deeper. It's much longer lasting, and you got to give yourself permission to experience fulfillment because the happiness trap, it's so addicting.
Mm.
It's so comforting even. So by taking those risks, you really do put yourself in a vulnerable place, but that's where you need to be to really know your strengths and understand what fulfillment is.
Yeah. So, you packed your bags and you upped sticks to China. You've, of course, blogged and YouTubed your experience in China, but yet tell us a little bit about that year in a completely new country. And did you actually speak any Chinese dialect at all before you went?
I love that question. So it was such a coincidental thing because MIT was doing this study the summer before I went to China where they were having people take a Chinese class and they would pay you to be a participant in the study. And they were just kind of like measuring how your brain changes as you learn a new language. So I actually got paid to be a participant in the study. And they scanned my brain and I got this really cool picture of what my brain looks like. And I learned Chinese, just really elementary Chinese, the month before I went to China.
Wow.
So yeah, you would think that, it would help me get by. But then I arrive in China and, for lack of a better term, all hell broke loose. And I mean, not only language wise, because, I was located in southern China. So the dialect was completely different from the dialect that I was taught back in Boston. But, I kind of got myself in a teaching abroad horror story. And it was a very scary time for me. I will not lie about it. I was considering coming home. I really didn't know what to do because when I had arrived, I was told beforehand that the school I would work for, they'd have us in these nice furnished apartments, that we'd be working so many hours a week, and that everything would be, we'd have food provided for us. We were told all these promises that I learned when I got there that were actually false.
Ah.
So yeah, it was very scary because we showed up at the school and they said that our apartments weren't ready. So we're like, okay, so where are we living now? And they said, oh, well, we have some international dorms in the back of the school that we'll have you stay in. So I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. So myself and the 10 or 15 other English teachers, who were also fresh college graduates from America, we start walking over to the back of the school, and I noticed that there's just piles of debris everywhere. There's like garbage, there's trash, and then we finally get to the back, and by then I knew something was up, like something
Mm.
was weird. And there are these little like wooden huts that were just lined up. So at first I'm like, all right, maybe this will be cool. We'll have our own little home to live in. So then we open up the door to one of these huts, and they have like six bunk beds crammed in each one, with two squatting toilets in the back, with no plumbing. And I don't, if for people who haven't been to Asia, squatting toilets are basically like these little holes in the ground, and you used to squat over them, and that's how most bathrooms in Asia are. Is they have the squatting toilets.
Mm.
So it smelled terrible. There were flies everywhere. There was construction going on at the school, and uh, I was just like, "What's going on?" It was so bizarre. And then they have us go to this welcome lunch. So we arrive at the welcome lunch, and we're all a little bit nervous because our housing accommodations weren't that safe. They weren't clean, and they give us these little plastic containers that look like they've been sitting around for maybe a week or so. And we open them up, and they have some kind of old rice inside with this puddle of oil, and inside the oil was some kind of meat. I don't know what kind of meat it was. So we all just politely kind of look at this meal because we want to be polite. We're visitors to the country, we're new to the school, and then they hand us the chopsticks. So I kind of rip off the paper that holds the chopsticks, and I notice some dust kind of fly off. I'm like, oh, what's this? So I continue opening the chopstick slip, and I notice that there's mold that's lined up on the chopsticks. And at that point, I was like, all right, like I can't eat this food. We were hungry. We didn't have a home to live in, so it was scary. Like this was within like 48 hours of arriving at our school, and it just continued to go downhill from there. They would have us go inside their boardroom, and they'd present us with these new contracts, and they'd try to like manipulate us into signing on these new contracts that would basically force us to work double the hours. They forced us to teach extra subjects that we weren't qualified to teach. And at that point, we were trapped. We had no other choice but to kind of do what they were telling us to do. So I was really scared the first few weeks because I ended up starting to teach at the school. I didn't want to be there, but something inside me said, stick this out. You can get through this. You can do it. You came here for a reason, and don't let this destroy you. So after a few weeks, I started looking into. I realized that I had other connections in China who were looking for teachers. So I was really lucky because the timing was perfect. I was able to find another teaching job in the same city. So I remember like one night I just went home from the school that I was originally at. I packed my bags and I just shipped across to the other side of the city to teach at this new school. And it was just night and day. They were welcoming. They actually followed the contract, and I stayed at that school for the remainder of my year. So it was a completely opposite experience. And I tell this story because, as people pursue their passions or as people take risks, it's so important to realize that sometimes things just don't go as planned. Sometimes you are going to fall down, and that's okay. The important thing is to just remember that there's always hope. And in addition to having hope, always see opportunities. It's so easy to just get stuck in that hole and to just be so consumed by your problems that, you can't even see a brighter future. But I think by being able to have hope and see those opportunities, I was able to get myself out of a really shitty situation,
Mm.
and I made my year in China just incredible. By the end of the year, I was, in the best shape of my life, mentally, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually, I'd say. Um, and financially, I was able to save a ton of money. So, I just love sharing that because especially a lot of people who I talk to are considering teaching abroad or taking a risk,
Mm.
leaving their current jobs. And it's scary. It is absolutely terrifying to take away your foundation and start something new. But, you know, once you really commit yourself to it and you keep an eye out for opportunities and always remain hopeful, it's amazing how you can impress yourself in how capable you are.
It sounds like you definitely learned a ton about self reliance and resilience and keeping your options open. But weren't there times where you were seriously considering finding the closest office of the U.S. Embassy and saying something's wrong here, I'm being exploited? Or
It's interesting because I could have done that, right? I could have gone to an embassy. I could have, I could have packed my bags and just left. I could have done all these different things,
mm,
but there was again that voice. It's like an intuitive type of message that my mind was telling me to just, that things would get better and that I could get through this myself. And I was able to. So I think that it's so important for people to just realize that you as a person have so much strength, and also in that period where I was down, I had a complete mental breakdown. I was like crying. I didn't want to sleep alone at night. And I remember running to one of my friends' apartments, like, can I come crash at your apartment? I don't want to be alone right now. Because you're in a foreign country, they speak a totally different language, and you can barely order food off of a menu because that's how confusing everything is.
mm,
Um, so I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to just go home or leave it all behind because I knew that there was definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. And it was there, after the first couple months, that hump, that like culture shock. I mean, my culture shock was, nothing compared to what I went through at the school. But right when you get through that, it's everything's just uphill. It's just having that persistence and, as you said, the resiliency. And there's just one other thing though that you just reminded me of, and it's this idea that there's the cliche that people always tell you, like, enjoy the journey or find joy in the journey. And I think it's great advice, but I think that nowadays, with people so focused on the instant gratification or just the happiness, I think that we forget to even allow ourselves to have a journey. And what I mean
mm,
by that is people, how are you going to find joy in your journey if you're not even having a journey to begin with?
mm.
So, so to put this into what I was just talking about, I stayed in China and I gave myself that journey. And yes, I had a low period, really low period, but I was able to rise above that because I committed to the journey. So
Mm.
I think before we can tell ourselves to enjoy whatever journey we're on, we first need to allow ourselves to have a journey to begin with.
Yeah. So that seems like I'm just trying to arrange my own thoughts a little bit here, Frank. But I guess
I know that's a
it's
lot.
that difference between you did have if not an out, but at least an option that many people would not consider a wrong one or a step backward, if you know what I mean, where perhaps you could have, in a way, stuck with the contract that you originally given with your job and perhaps fought for it, but you somehow recognized or understood that if you kind of just kept going and kept looking for other opportunities,
Mm,
it would almost it would help you as a human being more in the long run. And it sounds like
absolutely.
that certainly was the case in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, one thing that I also learned from it was, in any situation, especially the most challenging situations that we're faced with, we really can be victims or victors, and ultimately the choice is ours. And by victim, I don't mean that you're a victim in the sense that you give up. I mean victim in the sense that a victim to your own thoughts,
Mm.
victim to your own feelings. Because once you realize that you have responsibility and control over how you think, feel, and act, it opens up a world of opportunities for you, and it's so empowering. And I think that's what I was able to learn from going through that experience. It started off as a horror story, and it ended up being, a hero story. And I think that it's inspiring when people are able to kind of step into that place, and we're all capable of doing it. So that's what I really love to promote in my work, my videos, and my coaching. And I'm going back to China, so I mean, it wasn't that bad.
Fantastic.
So yeah.
So after China, was the backpacking around Southeast Asia directly after China, or did you come back home first before you went and did that?
Oh yeah. So that was about halfway through the year in China.
Mm.
The one of the cool things about teaching English in China specifically is that you get to enjoy the Chinese New Year, which is about 40 days of holiday. So I spent my holiday on a crazy backpacking trip around Southeast Asia, and I never would have seen myself as the backpacker type until I, went overseas. And I had such a blast. I went to Thailand, Bali, Cambodia, Singapore, and Malaysia. And it just, I mean, any time that someone is able to backpack or travel for a really long period of time, it's so incredible how it's able to, every day you are able to start fresh and have your own adventure and just be so mindful of everything that's going on around you. So whenever I get, distracted, or whenever I am kind of losing focus, I just kind of put myself back into the place when I was backpacking, because I'm just so aware of everything. I'm aware of myself. I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm aware of other people around me, and it's amazing just the type of energy and excitement that rushes through your veins when you go on a backpacking trip. So I had an absolutely amazing time. Tons of craziness happened. Um, as what happens on I'm sure most backpacking trips. So yes, that was one of the major highlights of my year in China.
Mm. So after you got back from your year in China, did you start in as a coach immediately? How did that dream job for you actually commence?
Well, yeah, I started to, plant those seeds for coaching while I was in China, because I knew that I wanted to ultimately be a coach. And, my experiences in China actually, I think, gave me that chance to actually to walk the talk as a coach, because it's so easy for any coach or therapist or spiritual luminary to tell us what we need to know. Oh, find your purpose or discover your passion, find joy in the journey. It's so easy for anybody to say that. Nowadays, you can find millions of blog posts that are basically regurgitating the same thing.
Mm.
But to actually experience and live that, it deepens that on such an intimate level. So by putting myself outside my comfort zone, by embracing the vulnerability of, being alone and blazing my own trail per se, it's encouraged me even further to be a coach and to inspire other people who are ready to take that adventure of their own.
Mm. So, what were those early days like when you were basically setting yourself up as your own business? So, was that the case? Were you, when you were starting out, were you pretty much working as Frank Macri, the solo coach, or did you join any other groups or organizations?
I started to plant those seeds and begin coaching while I was in China. And when I completed my year in China, I actually moved over to Vancouver, British Columbia. Shout out to any Canadian listeners right now. I had a fun time living in BC, and I finished my coaching certification there, and I began to facilitate leadership and career development workshops. So I was able to start kind of putting these stories together and providing value to people who are ready to start creating their own adventures.
Who were the some of the first people you worked with, at least, if you can tell us any stories about your first clients without perhaps naming anyone, any specific names, but it always seems like the first challenge when you were setting up your business and being in a similar space at the moment, it always seems like that first challenge is just finding someone with whom you can work and then who will give you your first paycheck for the work that you've done for them.
Right, right. And it is hard at first because, you really need to establish some credibility
Mm.
and maybe start to build a platform. So, at first, at my very first workshop, I did it at a gym in Vancouver. And I had about 30 people sign up. They were interested in attending. So I get everything ready. I'm excited. It's my first workshop. I'm ready to go. And nobody comes.
Ah.
Zero people. And, I was kind of bummed out about it,
Mm.
but then I realized as I was walking home, hey, if I do this workshop again and I get one person, hey, that's 100% improvement in terms of attendance.
Very
And
true, yeah.
and that's a pretty good place to be. So I rescheduled the workshop, and lo and behold, one person came. And you know what? I was so excited when that one person walked through the door because I had told myself beforehand that even if one person comes, it's not about the number of people. It's about the experience that you create and share with whoever's there.
Mm.
So, but that was a huge block that I was dealing with because I was so ready to just help everyone with everything. And I think that is probably some advice that I'd give my self a year ago. And for anybody who's thinking of kind of starting their own passion business, because especially service-minded people, we really want to help as many people as possible. But the thing is, sometimes that's not the most effective way to start a business, at least in the beginning. So I had this workshop with this one woman. She happened to be a bit older, and her name was Mary. And we had a blast. Like, we just kept it so personal, and we were able to talk, and she was so impressed with some of the things that I had to share. And, it really does take that one person for things to just snowball. And it's amazing how much power just one individual can have. So, I really am so grateful for Mary because she was not only someone that I was able to connect with and really enjoy that connection, but she gave me, I guess you would call the training wheels that I could use to then continue to build my business.
Mm. So, take us through a little bit of what the life of Frank Macri, coach, is like at the moment. I think a lot of us, we sometimes put our dream jobs on kind of a pedestal and assume that as soon as we get into that ideal career, every single aspect of it will be sunshine and rainbows and a life of ease. And I think, as other people have suggested, one of the things that you need to do is, if you're really trying to decide whether a career is for you, get an idea of what the actual day to day of it is like. So, what is that? What is a working day, week, month in the life of Frank Macri like for you?
Well, I love that you ask this because it's so important to think about that question early on. Before you run after a dream or chase a goal, really figure out what your vision is, what you envision your life to look like, and not only what it's going to look like, but how you want to feel. And I was able to do this as I began expanding my coaching business because at first I thought, okay, I'll have like a full schedule of clients. I'll have like 20, 25 people a week, and I'll be coaching all day. And then as I started to get more clients, I realized that's not really an ideal situation for me. And the reason is because when you look at your values, when you look at the elements that you really hold deeply to your heart, you are able to then use that information to create the life that you want. So for me, one of my values is flexibility. I really like having a flexible schedule. I like to not have everything be so structured. And that's not for everybody. Some people really do like having a schedule that is, they're able to prepare it in advance and it stays kind of routine. But for me, I get bored if I have that going on every day.
Mm.
So I realized that I don't really want to be coaching 20 or 25 people a week. So I actually cut that number down to five. And I told myself that by cutting that number down to five people, I'm able to devote much more individualized and focused attention to each of my five clients rather than having 25 clients and being burnt out, barely able to have the energy to coach each one. Because as a coach, you really do need to have an incredible amount of attention. You are devoting your time to listening to someone else on a very deep level. And listening could be exhausting. So that's kind of how I reframed my approach. And that's, how I have been approaching things in terms of my business. But that's not to say that, that's all that I'm doing. Right now, I'm kind of in a transition where I'm preparing to go back to Asia. I'm planning to expand my coaching business there, continue coaching clients online. And I'm also finishing up a book that I started writing, which is very exciting. And I just cannot wait to get that baby out. So that's kind of what a day in the life has been like for me so far.
Mm. But of course, this is the book you're working on at the moment isn't the first one that you've written. I have to touch on, as I mentioned in the introduction, the work that you've already done with that wonderful title of Life Orgasm, a provocative guide to living with passion. So, Frank, what can you tell us about this wonderful sounding thing that is the life orgasm, and how do people have their first and perhaps then, get more of them in their lives?
Yeah, so life orgasm came to me, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
one evening when I was making videos and I was kind of bored of what I was saying on camera. Like the cliches, they get really old and they're not really that useful. All the platitudes, be yourself or uncover your passions. They're just these little soundbite phrases that have become so over.
Oh, looks like we might be having another little bit of trouble. Hello, have
Hello.
I got you back?
Yes, and Rob, I wanted to just clarify one little detail. So, Life Orgasm is not yet released, but it will be released
Ah,
soon. So, it is the first book. I didn't know if you wanted to.
right.
Just, I'm sorry if I was confusing. So, if you wanted to just reword the way that you said that, perhaps.
Ah, got it. Okay, so Life Orgasm is not, in fact, is not the book that's already published. It is the one that will be,
Will
as it were,
post.
coming soon. Um,
Yes. No pun intended.
Indeed not, no. But look, you were, just before the call dropped out again, you were talking a little bit about the videos that you had been making and the overused cliches of personal motivation and success that we hear all the time, and your struggle with those.
Yeah. Yeah, just, I went to Boston University, and if I were to tell you the number of times I heard the term BU said over and over and over, because those were my school's initials.
Ah,
So BU, 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 and it's great advice, and it's just one example of the many different types of platitudes that are, just kind of being bombarded in the self and personal development industry. So I was making my videos and realizing I was just saying those same exact cliches. But what do people really get out of that? When someone says "be you," well, what does that even mean?
mm,
What does that look like? So life orgasm is, it takes that age old wisdom and it puts it in a very fun and provocative light, because the way that I came up with that concept was I realized that just the act of having sex is so similar to getting what we want out of life.
mm.
So the book basically divides it into 7 different chapters, which takes people on 7 steps that they need to, as I call, pop their purpose-filled cherry.
Oh, it definitely sounds like quite the fun approach to personal motivation. So, uh, and from the sounds of things, everything while you're working on the book, the career as a personal coach is taking you from and your people from success to success. And look, just to clarify your position on the paid to play spectrum, your job as a coach, it is actually covering all your bills, isn't it? Is that right?
Currently, not entirely.
Mm.
But it's interesting because I think that it's so easy for people to kind of go about thinking that there's the 9 to 5, which is pretty traditional, and there's nothing wrong with having a 9 to 5.
Mm.
However, when people get sucked into the rat race, that's where we become kind of damaged in terms of how we are understanding and using our finances.
Mm.
So by rat race, I just mean, we get the job, we make money, and we spend money, and then we get the promotion, and we make more money, and then we spend more money, and it just becomes this cycle where, you're not actually becoming more financially stable if you're constantly running around the same hamster wheel over and over and over.
Mm.
So, I realized as I was starting my business that when it comes to having personal freedom, which is, something that so many of us really value and care about, is just having that freedom. It's not so much about the freedom of money. It's more so freedom of time. And for me, the time element is so much more valuable than money.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, a lot of times when people, from what I've learned and researched, they want to eventually get the high paying job so that way they could retire when they're middle aged and after they've spent 20 or 30, 40 years climbing up the career ladder, with the hopes that when they finally retire, they'll then be able to breathe and enjoy life
Mm.
and, enjoy their time. So a lot of what I offer in my coaching is to break that cycle in its tracks so that people, especially millennials, don't have to wait decades of their lives to start experiencing fulfillment and instead doing that right now.
Mm.
So yes, I'm such a fan of this notion of working smarter rather than working harder. And I think once people are able to shift their perspective to work smarter, where you could be working less hours and maybe even making less money, but having much more freedom of time, that's really where we get that fulfillment for someone who really values flexibility, especially. So it's very interesting how society kind of flips that and has us tricked to think that it goes the other way around.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that you've got to spend most of your life working to get the flexibility instead of actually uh, being able to get the flexibility straight off and then
Right.
build a life around that. It's it does
Absolutely.
almost seem this sad thing where in theory you are in this life presumably to help other people achieve their goals, and yet when you sort of look around, everyone is in the same lot, and you know they're just all they're really doing is help each other build and reinforce this myth that the good stuff comes later, and the only way to get to it is through uh, this strange 9 to 5, uh, for want of a better word, thing.
Yeah, I'm a lot of my friends tell me, Frank, you're so impatient. You're so impatient. And, I think that impatience can be very, very valuable and
Mm.
it could be a good thing. Impatience not in the sense of uh, just, like before we were talking about the instant gratification, but I think that, time and life, it just shoots on by, especially 2015. I can't believe it's already almost August. I mean,
Yeah.
this year has shot by, and time is such a precious resource, and it keeps going whether we like it or not.
Mm.
So, in a sense, there needs to be a sense of urgency when it comes to creating a life that you want. And especially in your 20s, you start making those decisions and building upon those commitments that, unless they are aligned with what you really want, by the time you're in your middle-aged years, it's a lot harder to change that. It's a lot harder to go back and then start anew. By then you have the family, you have the home, you have the mortgage, the car payments, maybe even student loans still.
Mm.
So it's so important to really take awareness and use what you have as you're in your 20s so that way the rest of your life can just unfold.
Mm. So, you mentioned a little earlier on that there would be one thing that perhaps you'd wished you'd known a little earlier on, and that is that the desire to help as many people as possible is perhaps not the most helpful thing for you when you're just getting started out. And that kind of got borne out when you did your public workshop, and the first one that actually got attendance, only one person came along to. What would two other things that you perhaps wish that you'd known when you were starting out be that maybe you could pass on to someone who is in a similar situation now that you were back then?
Love that. So I think another question would be, what do you want to feel? I think reflecting on what you want to feel is something that we sometimes overlook because a lot of times people say, "Oh, Frank is a coach. He helps people achieve their goals," or it's we think that it's all about creating a goal, committing to it, and then fulfilling the goal. And a lot of times we don't realize that it's not really the goal that we're going for. It's the feeling that the goal gives us. And that's what we want. So, for example, if I have a goal to lose 20 pounds, for instance, or put on 10 pounds of muscle, and if I were to ask myself, well, how would I feel if I were to do that, were to put on some muscle? And if my answer were to be I'd feel confident, I'd feel empowered, that's the true goal. And that's where we need to focus our energy into the feeling that we want. So
Mm.
if someone's starting wanting to create a business out of what they're passionate about, if the feeling that they're going for is freedom or if it's liberation, that's what we need to focus on, because when you're just focusing on the goal, you're kind of just going for the external, the surface layer satisfaction. But if you really become aware of what you want to feel and then create that energy into your life, you're able to hit upon what you really want. So that would be one of the things that I would encourage people to reflect on is what do they want to feel? And I think one other would be for people to think, it's so easy nowadays, especially with millennials, there's a lot of social pressure to please or to impress. And now that social media has become a cultural norm, it's so easy to get sucked into wanting external validation for anything that we do. We
Mm,
post a
mm.
picture, we want to have people like the picture, comment on the picture, and we feel bad if people don't do that. So it's easy to create our lives that are based around having us being validated by external sources like our friends or our family. So I would ask people, and this is one of my favorite questions that I ask clients, is that if you were to imagine that you release any need for external validation, what would you be doing in your life? And I've had people answer that question saying that they would be doing everything differently. They wouldn't be working the job they're doing. Wouldn't be spending their time on the things that they're investing their time in. They might not be living where they're living. They might not be dating whoever they're dating. Because once you're able to realize how much external validation plays a factor in our lives, it's amazing for you to kind of separate yourself from your ego and instead focus on your absolute truth.
That is probably one of the scariest things that we all have to deal with. I mean, I know that even uh, me, who doesn't think of himself as the most social media active person, I know that I have felt, especially recently a few times, uh, a bit of need to get a bit of validation from people on Facebook and Twitter and what have you. But yeah, that seems to be the biggest struggle. We worry so much about how we're going to be thought of that we don't just concentrate on how we're honestly feeling about ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up an important distinction because, with your podcast, or if you're someone who's doing this uh, as a business, professional validation is very different from personal validation because professionally you could want people to give good reviews, or if someone's, having a blog, people to share your blog post or comment on your blogs. But, it's so important to separate the personal side to that because if you're able to believe and accept yourself in the terms where you can validate yourself as you are, it's amazing how powerful that is. And it is scary, as you said. It's scary if you're new to it. But when you start getting into the flow of releasing that external validation and instead validating yourself from within, it's quite powerful. And I think that for people wondering what that means, validation, it's really just telling yourself and believing that whatever you're experiencing, it's okay and it's normal and it's exactly what you're meant to be experiencing in that moment.
Mm.
Because any person who has a feeling, that feeling is good. Like that's an okay feeling to have. It's not good or bad. It just is. So we are so keen to try to cover up even especially our sadness, and think it's not okay to show signs of upset or sadness. But if you're able to validate yourself and say, you know what, yeah, I'm feeling sad right now, and I'm going to honor that sadness rather than push it away. It's so powerful because then you're able to actually release that energy and that emotion and then get yourself back on track.
Mm. Well, Frank, after listening to this episode, where can people track you down and engage your services?
People can track me down on my website is thefranklife.com,
Mm.
and you can also find me on YouTube. I post videos to my YouTube series Fridays with Frank every week. And I post I answer a lot of my viewers' questions, but I also post some vlogs from all of my adventures traveling and from my life abroad. Um, So, yeah, I would recommend people wanting to connect directly to just going to thefranklife.com. And for anyone listening who does go over to my website, I have a free offer of basically a download, 7 ways to climax on life. That kind of gives you a sneak peek into some of the life orgasm steps that we were talking about earlier. So if anyone's interested in having that, I guarantee it'll put a smile on your face.
Fantastic. Well, look, Frank, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me that you are downloading this episode and getting it between your ears, and I hope that the chat in this episode was of help to you. Now, there are a couple of things that I would like to ask you to do for me. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to it on iTunes or your preferred podcast aggregator. And while you're there, could you give it a rating and leave a review, please? Also, on social media, could you like, favourite and share it? The Paid to Play podcast has pages on Facebook and Google+. Please like the page or add it to your circles as appropriate. Like +1 and share the episodes. And also join the Facebook group Fans of the Paid to Play podcast. There is also a Paid to Play podcast channel on YouTube where I upload the episodes. Please like and share them, and I would love to see your comments there. If you are a Twitterer, I am there as well. You can follow me at ByRobF. That's Bravo Yankee Romeo Oscar Bravo Foxtrot. I tweet the episodes on there, so if you could please favourite and retweet as well. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I would love it if you could sign up to Patreon and back the Paid to Play podcast. You will find the Patreon page for this podcast at www.patreon.com. That's Papa Alpha Tango Romeo Echo Oscar November.com/paid to play, all one word. Patreon is a crowdfunding website where, instead of backing a specific project once, people back ongoing projects like podcasts on a per month or per episode basis. You'll find my milestones and goals for the Patreon campaign there, and it would be great if you could get behind this podcast on a financial basis, even if it's just for $1 an episode. It will help me make the podcast bigger and better. I will be able to put a little bit more time and cash into it, and that way it will be able to better help you get paid to play. Now, next week's episode is going to be an even episode, which means it's Money Where My Mouth Is, Musings and Mailbag. It's where I talk about my own progress toward getting paid to play, put a little bit of overthinking into some of the issues I've encountered, and the overall idea of taking what you love doing and asking people to pay you for the products and skills of doing what you love. And I also answer your questions and read out your feedback. So I would love any mailbag submissions you might have. You can get in touch with me via any of the aforementioned social media. You can either leave a comment on the page or send me a private message. You can also email me at podcast@robf.com.au. Please indicate that your comment or email or private message is a mailbag question, and that you're okay for me to read it out on the episode, and also whether you're okay with me giving your name or online ID as the person who submitted the feedback or question. And if you've got multiple online IDs, please let me know which one you would prefer me to use. I am not a psychologist or trained therapist or coach. I'm just a guy with a mic and a dream and a little bit of experience and perspective. But again, I would love to hear from you. So, until next time, this is Rob Farker asking you to stand by your play. You might be surprised how many folks appreciate it. I license the interview and monologue content of the Paid to Play podcast under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 3.0 unported license. That roughly means you can sample, remix and redistribute it as long as you tell people that the bits of it you use came from Rob Farker and don't charge anyone for your work. For the full legal text, go to creativecommons.org. The theme music is written, performed by, copyright and used with the kind permission of Miracle of Sound. All rights reserved. For more great music inspired by geek culture, check out miracleofsound.net. This podcast is hosted by Business Web Integrations. Get in touch with them at businesswebintegrations.com.au to discuss your web hosting and business needs.